to this edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. It is our first program of the new year. It is going to be, we feel, the year of regime change. Maybe not the completion of regime change, but the beginning of regime change. The current lords of misrule, of corruption and stupidity and incompetence in Washington, D.C., their malevolence is drawing gradually to a close. The auspices, the signs of the times look extremely grim for the current Washington regime. So we want to welcome you back for the new year and hope that you will make this broadcast here once a week starting on Saturday your headquarters for keeping up with these matters, but also that you will also listen to and support the American System broadcast, which starts off a separate website. You can get to both of them through tarpley.net, but the American System is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at about 9 o'clock at night, give or take. And for that, you are requested to plunk down a mere bagatelle, really a token fee in today's world. And with that, you have access to the very best that I can do, and that has to do with historical insights, I think a pretty good level of being informed, and, of course, economic program. And since human affairs do rely on economics to such an extraordinary degree, that's important too. And there's this other element, this intangible. It's called fighting spirit. And we don't have time to define all aspects of fighting spirit. But fighting spirit is, in some ways, what Bernie Sanders did not have when he let Hillary Clinton off the hook for this idiotic maneuver she pulled with her secret server. She was trying to preserve her emails from Freedom of Information Act requests, which might have exposed her as a warmonger and a meddler, somebody who was in many ways behind the catastrophic, disastrous, lunatic 2011 Arab Spring, which in some ways has set the stage for where we are now. And also the crazy, crazy meddling, the provocations, the very, very ill-advised meddling in Ukraine and other places under the rubric of the color revolutions, which have also played a large role in setting the stage for the current crisis. But those issues are not front and center right now, and this is also another thing that we can tell you. We can tell you what is priority, what is urgent now, what is not urgent now, what you should do this coming week. Well, obviously, the standing order we have is war warning, right? We're getting more and more of them. We just had a war warning this week from French President Macron, who believes that with that crazy big button Twitter from Trump this week, that has put the U.S. onto the path to war with North Korea. And we've had these warnings from Admiral Mullen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, from the head of the Marine Corps. We had them from Corker, Senator Corker in the autumn. We've had them in any number of forms. Brennan of the CIA. And for some of them, there was this question, can the handlers, can the palace guard restrain Trump? Can they act as governors, as Brennan put it? The answer to that seems to be sometimes, but not always. And the not always can be the path to a nuclear catastrophe for this country and the world. Look at your family, look at your wife, look at your children, your grandparents, your brother, your sister, your cousins, your friends. All of them are now in danger due to this mentally unstable, unfit individual in the White House. Now, those are the issues, and we'll be talking about economics. It's going to be a year of severe economic dislocations. All the dupes, all the Mickeys are out there celebrating Dow 25,000. Boys, these are the last days of Pompeii. Don't get overconfident. Maybe it's time to be a little bit less greedy, a little bit less prudent. Go back and read the story of Joseph P. Kennedy, the father of JFK. Joseph P. Kennedy, U.S. ambassador to Britain, but in the 1920s he was a stock speculator. That's why FDR made him the first head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, because he knew the business. And when he found that the bellboy in a hotel where he was staying was heavily invested in the stock market and dealing in stock tips and insider trading, he said, this has now saturated every corner of society. It's time for me to take my money off the table. So he did market timing, and for him it worked through this insight that at a certain point the bubble runs out. During 2018, there is every reason to believe that the bubble will run out of steam, that $1 trillion US are being removed from the speculative pool. Think of it as a kind of trilateral U.S., Japan, Europe speculative pool. There is other money in there, of course, too. Now, China, Saudis, whatever. But that if $1 trillion is taken out, that's a kind of functional equivalent of what happened when the British raised their bank rate in late September 1929. It takes a whole bunch of hot money that then flees the scene, in this case the New York stock market, and that looks very, very unstable. So consider this a warning. It's time now to take money off the table and prepare for all eventualities. Of course, this is not to be construed as investment advice. Don't give me that. But this is now, if you've been fortunate enough to be a part of this, then you should be very glad you were, and at this point begin to reduce risk and diversify. All right. What's the big word in Washington this week? I would say there are two big lessons. The first one is that Trump is unfit for office. He is mentally not equipped. He does not have the brains, the intellect, the temperament, the attention span. These are all very basic things. These are not really effective campaigning charges, right? They seem kind of tame, right? Normally you want to say my opponent is a thief and beats his wife. It seems to say this is the wrong temperament. That's really not very effective. As a matter of fact, Hillary tried to argue that Trump had a bad, insufficient temperament to be president. But now we're getting this mass of evidence, right, which, of course, has been building up and coalescing all during the long year of 2017, and we were all in the trenches and social media and demonstrations and marches and protests and meetings and public gatherings and so forth. Trump really is not capable of being president. He doesn't have the psychological self-control to do the things you have to do. Got to assimilate a lot of information. So that's the first point. We'll embroider this more in the second segment, but that's number one. Not fit to be president. Back in a minute on World Crisis Week. During this tempestuous year, probably full of very, very rapid reversals in the situation, all kinds of cataclysmic events, economic, political, military, tremendous psychological stress. make this program your headquarters, because I know what's going on. Most of this stuff that's coming out in the past week about the mental condition of the current tenant of the White House, I had made that available in the spring of 2016 in quite a bit of detail. So this is a good thing to follow. And, of course, the American System, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, over at americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. That's where you can get the lowdown every weekday evening, Monday through Thursday, 4 programs a week. And again, here's the token subscription. I think well worth it. So what have we learned this week, we might ask ourselves now? Well, the first thing is Trump is psychologically, mentally, intellectually, if I can even say this, not capable of being president of the United States. He is literally not capable of carrying out these large responsibilities. We're learning, of course, from this book by Michael Wolff, right, the well-known biographer and columnist. Michael Wolff has put together a book called Fire and Fury, inside the Trump administration. And this book, by the way, is now out of the bottle. The genie is out of the bottle. If you had purchased this as an electronic edition to be sent to a Kindle or a similar device, they have been sent. I can guarantee this. I can testify to this personally. So it's out. The very clumsy and thoroughly un-American attempt at prior restraint has been a failure. If you don't know what prior restraint is, subscribe to the American System and listen into the Thursday broadcast, where we do a rather complete exposition of prior restraint and censorship in the light of the First Amendment, of course, the freedom of speech, and also of the Zenger precedents, the Zenger trial from the early 1700s in New York City, which also helped to establish this principle of freedom of the press. The question of the way to get a book at the center of attention used to be, as I explained in this broadcast on Thursday, it used to be get it banned in Boston, and then everybody for sure will want to read it. Well, banned in Boston, the functional equivalent of banned in Boston, is now the Trump gang wants to suppress the book. They're trying to exercise prior restraint. This is a big threat to the First Amendment, that some guy who happens to be the president sicks a lawyer on you saying, don't you dare publish that. That would be prior restraint, because you could say, well, he's only acting in a private capacity. He's not acting as president. Baloney. That would be the functional equivalent, and that's a violation of the Constitution, right? That will be written down, right? As Nikki Haley might say. We'll be taking names. Well, we'll be making a list of all of these misdeeds. So Wolff has successfully navigated that. He was on the NBC Today show today for about 8 to 10 minutes. He's going to be on the Sunday shows, at least one of them on Sunday. He's going to be on O'Donnell's program on Monday evening. The cat is out of the bag. And what do we find? That everybody around Trump, the people who know him best, the people who have seen him in action, are 100% of the opinion that he is unfit for office. He's incapable of carrying out the duties of the presidency. He doesn't read. He doesn't listen. He cannot converse. He can't engage in an exchange of ideas. Of course, we here sort of take our stand on the Platonic dialogue, right? The method of teaching and learning, which is largely got to do with also verbalizing. That's the way humanity makes it. That's how we've made it thus far, by exercising intellectual and cognitive faculties, and above all, in people who set themselves up as leaders. That's what you got to do. But in this case, no, we've got one cabinet member says he's a moron, the other cabinet member says he's an idiot, the other one says he's a dope, the top senator in foreign affairs says that he's from the adult daycare, that he's infantile, and so forth. And this is blanket. This is across the board, as Wolf assures us. And, of course, we knew all that, right? We had a list of all these epithets. And, of course, Trump engages in what I guess we'd have to call a narcissistic devaluation of those around him. He's got to portray them as bunglers, just in general, but also whenever anything goes wrong, that can't be his fault. He is incapable of facing responsibility. He can't take it like a man. He's something less than a man in that department. So, unfit, and we're told that Mitch McConnell is full of complacent triumphalism this week because he seems to have dealt a mortal wound to his tormentor Bannon. Probably Ryan is also silently celebrating, or maybe not so silently, who knows? We'll find out, because Bannon had called for his ouster too. But look, what this means is they're putting party and even their own narrow political gate receipts, right? Their political swindles that they do ahead of the country, because you've now got this moron in charge of nuclear weapons. So this is the first point. Who in the United States today could ignore the fact that you're dealing here with someone who is manifestly incapable? They can't read briefing books, can't listen to briefings. There's no plan. Everything is lurching more or less at random from one outside of things impinging in. This is impossible. And then, the other big thing we've learned this week is the remedy. And we'll be back in a minute with that. Radio. So, unfit for office. We'll have more to say about that in just a minute. But this is now the overwhelming consensus. And, by the way, it's a worldwide consensus. Just in terms of what came in this week, right? Remember, this is the guy, he's got to be there for foreign policy. That's half the job, easily. We now had this occasion, 4 Latin American presidents listening to Trump blather about how he wanted a military option to attack Venezuela, to invade Venezuela, to carry out international aggressive war against Venezuela. And after the Latin American presidents were stunned, shocked, dismayed, full of consternation, on the exit debriefing, the unanimous opinion of the 4 Latin American presidents was, he is insane. Now, that's the other thing we saw this week, the question of, I've got a nuclear button too, my button is bigger, and my button works. Right? With this, we enter the forest of psychosexual depravity and weakness, of course, where you've got to have something to prove. You've got a chip on your shoulder because you're feeling very weak inside. You're afraid of being perceived as weak and perhaps even girlish, right? You look at studies of European fascism, there is a horror of the feminine and of women, because this is considered to be a principle that undermines the macho, brutal persona you're supposed to cultivate. Anyway, this is a universal opinion. Now, the remedy. People have learned this week about the 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment to the Constitution was the best response that could be managed in the middle to late 1960s in the wake of the Kennedy assassination, John F. Kennedy, the RFK, Robert F. Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King assassination, and so forth. The 25th Amendment, passed by Congress July 6, 1965, ratified by sufficient states February 10, 1967. And here we read the Section 4, whenever the Vice President and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the President pro tempore of the Senate, that's Hatch right now, for at least for the next few months, President pro tempore of the Senate, the senior guy in the Senate, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duty of his office. The Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. That would be Pence. Don't kid yourself. At least unless Pence is brought down first, in the same way that Spiro Agnew was brought down quite a few months before Nixon left office, right? And they put somebody else in there through the procedure, which is also established, I think, even in this amendment. So that's the 25th Amendment. Now, when Trump first came to office, the 25th Amendment was not widely known. Many people were not aware of it. I hope now that the 25th Amendment is rapidly becoming better known, because this is, in terms of a short-term solution, this is what at least you have to demand. Don't be discouraged by the fact that it's Trump's cabinet and that Pence has to go along with it. You know that Pence is an incorrigible opportunist, don't you? You think Pence is loyal to anything under the sun except Pence? That would be very foolish. Of course, he has a certain kind of loyalty to his billionaire donors, his billionaire reactionary parasitical financial angels. But other than that, I'm sure he has nothing but resentment for Trump because of the way that he's had to grovel. God, we're going to be looking through the Fire and Fury book by Michael Wolff and see if the Calvary of Pence is done justice to, right? Because he's been humiliated and trampled on and mocked and reviled and so forth. And he's got to always come back. Yes, boss. Yes, chief. I should jump. How high, boss? And so forth, right? So, but then look around, right? You think there's any love lost by Tillerson on Trump? Mattis has been quieter, but, well, I'm sure he's appalled. By the time that Trump wanted to fire his hand-picked general for Afghanistan, or at least the one that the military hierarchy had wanted, no. What do you think about a couple of other people in that cabinet? What do you think about Sessions? Right? Sessions might conclude that it's if he doesn't do something about Trump, that Sessions will be out soon, because that's part of the news this week. The Republicans who want to fire Mueller realize they've got to knock out Sessions, because if they go through the whole routine of firing Rosenstein, that will look like the Saturday Night Massacre of 1973. That will be a disaster. Whereas if Sessions decides that he wants to spend more time with his family, then you can put some torpedo in there, right? Some stooge or running dog of the White House. And that way, that guy could then begin to strangle Mueller and the investigation, which we here are determined to do everything possible to oppose. So, the 25th Amendment. There was an article yesterday in Politico that Washington is obsessed by the 25th Amendment. And we have a very important, a very courageous lady. Her name is Bandy Lee. Bandy Lee is from I think it's the aspect of the Yale Law School that meshes with psychiatry, psychology, and similar disciplines. And she is the editor of a volume called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, which has almost 30 different experts in there expatiating on why this entire Trump tenure in office is extremely dangerous. And let me just quote one of her co-authors. Bandy Lee has been giving briefings to people in Congress. At the beginning of December, first week in December, she was on The Hill, and now she's going to be back. She's going to go to a dinner hosted by Rosa DeLauro, Congresswoman from Connecticut. I think she's the wife of Clinton's pollster. But she's also then going to appear at a town meeting here in the Maryland suburbs organized by Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin is the guy who wants to set up such body, at least as an advisory body, such body as the Congress may provide. Well, he wants to provide, he wants to take up that unrealized dimension of the 25th Amendment and say, let's have a board of 11 bipartisan, neutral, not partisan, nonpartisan, psychological experts who could at least deliver an advisory opinion to say, this president is going crazy. And we'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. By the way, today is Twelfth Night. Yes, if you're wondering what that Shakespearean reference was, Twelfth Night, well, Twelfth Night is tonight. Counting from Christmas Eve, this is the 12th night. So this would have been a time for great celebrations. And that, of course, means that tomorrow is Epiphany. This is the three magi arriving in Bethlehem. And the traditional association of Epiphany is this is when some very important fact or truth is made manifest, right? Traditionally in religion, it is you get to see God. You get to see the face of God. Well, at least in our time, we could hope to learn something important for Epiphany. And of course, this is in the old Italian tradition, this is when this benevolent witch, not a bad witch, but a good witch, La Befana, comes and gives presents to the kids. And there are some traditionalists who still cultivate the old La Befana story, right? These are older folkways, probably going back to the Roman Empire and perhaps the Etruscans, right? We'll look into it at some point. But this is today. So this is Happy 12th Night, right? We're recording on January 5th. Tomorrow's January 6th. That's Epiphany, right? The Three Kings. Various countries have these gâteaux du roi, right? The king cakes. The king cakes, I think, also in the American South. That's today. So, again, make it a big day on Epiphany. Learn something important, right? Gain insight into some important thing. And hopefully that's what we're doing, because this broadcast is heard on Epiphany. This is our Epiphany broadcast. All right. So we've just gone through. As a result of the Sturm und Drang of this week, the American public has learned two important things. First of all, Trump is unfit for office. And, we'll just embroider this a little bit. We are told that he, at certain points, does not recognize old friends, that he has a pattern of obsessively repeating anecdotes and stories, and this used to work off a 30 to 40 minute cycle where you could expect the same story to come up again, often more or less verbatim and not really connected into context. but that cycle is now shortening, and now it might be as little as 15 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. Bannon says he has lost it. He has crossed into the shadowy realm, and I think for many of us that's certainly very, very plausible. As we've always said, he's suffering from bad immediacy, right? The concept of bad immediacy, or schlechte Unmittelbarkeit in German philosophy, right? This is what Leibniz called mens momentania. It's a mind that lives purely in the moment, interested in immediate gratification, but in the moment. So say anything to get through the next minute, 2 minutes, right, to make yourself feel good in the short run. And then, of course, after that, the deluge. Well, that's not good enough for the United States. So, mens momentania, said Leibniz, carens recordationem, lacking in memory, lacking in history, lacking in context. This is bad immediacy writ large. Now, it's obviously maybe more. The interesting thing about these studies, and we're going to plow through this book, we've gotten some of it, but we'll do more. There's a combination of this, what you'd have to call emotional infantilism, with what I would call moral senility, because there's that too. Children have some kind of feelings, right? At least for those around them. But the moral senility, right? Do you care if all those people are dying in Yemen? If you're crushing this small country, the Palestinians, do you care about that? You're talking about getting tough with Iran. Do you realize what that might lead to? Above all, you say, end Obamacare. Well, do you realize that if that's all you do, that's 30 or 40,000 deaths per year? Or we have the best budget, getting according to Professor Larry Summers of Harvard, that's about 10,000 deaths coming out of the current budget, and so forth. So, emotional infantilism, big baby, childish, infantile, with moral senility. This concept of moral senility is one that we need because it's typical of decadence. And it contains also this other overriding theme, nihilism, that there's no belief in anything, no principle, not God, not the country, nothing except the self. And it's the raging infantile self. Now, if you ask, how can we explain the combination of emotional infantilism with moral senility? It seems to me this is maybe not so complicated. There used to be this concept of the second childhood. Another term for it, and this is the one that Madman Kim threw at him, right? Madman Kim can see Trump's problems. He can't see his own, or doesn't want to see his own. But the dotage, a dotard. What does it mean to be a dotard? In Shakespeare, King Lear is a dotard. He's called a dotard, right? His ungrateful daughters, Goneril and Regan, talk about him as a dotard, this senile old guy. And, of course, he's very willful, and he rages, and he's so concerned about his own prerequisites, his perks, and so forth. The dotard, the second childhood. So this is the combination. In other words, it's a sinister sign. That, I think, gets us at least somewhere close to where we need to bring the analysis. And, again, all kinds of cases here that they talk about, right? The repetition, the irascibility. Oh my God, he's going to erupt. He's going to fume. He's going to rage. He's full of rage transports. This is no good. And of course, some of this stuff gets into the more serious clinical forms. One of the people, the co-worker of Bandy Lee, being on television here in the last couple of days, this was the person who participated in these briefings and apparently will be back. He said, look, you don't know if he's mentally ill, but you know that he's dangerous. You can be dangerous without being mentally ill, and you can certainly be mentally ill without being dangerous. The majority, apparently, of those who are mentally ill don't really pose any particular threat. But in this case, given the nuclear arsenals and the military establishment and indeed economic means, which are quite formidable, this is worrisome. So the big point is dangerous. Focus, if you will, on the dangerous part, because that's something that really anybody should be able to evaluate. And you can tell if somebody's dangerous, and this combination is dangerous. Once again, stress the "my button is bigger than your button" tweet. That is simply dangerous. That could, just a gesture like that, every time you see that, you have to remind yourself that that could trigger this other, this madman in Korea, right? Madman Kim, Mad Dog Kim of Korea. He's as mad as a hatter. He's as mad as a March hare. And you can easily trigger him. He's got this audience of generals behind him saying, we want to see you live up to Kim Il-sung and Little Kim, and now Little Kim, you better live up to Kim Il-sung. His birthday is coming on the 15th of April. Live up to him or out you go. So he's got to act. He's very manipulable. And that's dangerous. Back in the second hour in just a minute. To the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is our first edition of the new year, and it is our Epiphany edition. Yes, January 6th, when this program is first heard in many places, that's Epiphany. That's when you get to see something important. You get an important insight. We hope to provide multiple epiphanies during the broadcast. And, of course, we're recording here in Washington on 12th night, because that's the way the season works. Now, let me catch up. We got such a wealth of material. Just remember, the concept is two things are now coming into clarity for the American people. First of all, this president is a terrible mistake. He's an aberration. He is, in some ways, a protest candidate who actually won. They say he was surprised. I'm not sure he was surprised. In other words, I don't think I am convinced that he tried to win all the way. He may have become discouraged in the last week or so, but he tried in every way to win, and that's why he needed Russia, of course. That's why he had to collude. So that part ought to be clear. But he tried to win, and, it was a protest vote that then boomeranged. We'll try to compare it to the Brexit situation in Britain, where remorse is growing. So remorse is growing here. This was a terrible mistake. He's not fit for office. And this is not ideology. This could be any project you want to say. In other words, can you operate politically as a chief executive? It means that you've got to have a minimal understanding. You've got to study certain policy details. You've got to go through a bunch of briefings. You've then got to work rather assiduously to line up support. You've got to curry favor with the senators and the congressmen. You have to offer them concessions. You have to know what they want. You have to ask them what they want. You've got to work on them one by one. That is political work at that level. He is incapable because he is so full of contempt. He has to be full of contempt because he ultimately feels so little inside that he's got to tear everybody down. That is what this process of devaluation comes down to. You can't really admire anybody. You've got to turn against them. You ultimately have no friends. So, Bandy Lee was the woman who did edited the book on The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. The guy that she was joined by in the briefings, James Gilligan. James Gilligan was on TV this week saying, look, the main thing is he's dangerous. There's abundant evidence. It's an unprecedented level of danger. Mental illness may or may not be there, but the main thing is dangerous, and that is something that anybody can see. You'll remember the chances assigned to him by Bannon. Bannon essentially seemed to be saying, Don, you have a one-third chance of being impeached in 4 years. You have a one-third chance of either being ousted under the 25th Amendment, non compos mentis, or incapable of carrying out the office. And you may have to resign to head that off. Or you have one-third chance of serving for 4 years, 30%, even a little bit less. So, dope, idiot, moron, adult daycare, unfit, on and on. And the contempt of those around him. Right? Leaders are supposed to inspire some kind of loyalty. Maybe Trump actually fulfills this condition that Hegel writes about, that the old, which Hegel criticizes, right? That no man is a hero to his valet. Well, that may be finally where we've gotten now, but that's impossible. You can't do it this way because you don't get any loyalty, right? That's the other thing. This is a snake pit. This White House is the worst snake pit we've ever seen. This is the war of all against all. Homo homini lupus. Each man is a wolf. No pun intended. Each man acts like a wolf towards the person next to him. Bellum omnium contra omnes. The war of all against all, unceasing. It is a Hobbesian White House. Hobbesian nihilism rules the roost. And this sophomoric attempt to suppress a book, that is really chilling. You'd think that would wake up a bunch of independents and intellectuals of that stripe. So, 2 points: unfit for office, and secondly, there is a 25th Amendment, and that could be started in various ways. Bannon has already warned Trump. They've been talking about it. Well then, boys, bring it on. Have it going. We've even got William Crystal, the neocon, right? Obviously, checkered past and everything. We don't forget. But he now says, I trust that Pence has prepared a memorandum that could be submitted to the cabinet for a 25th Amendment vote, and that he has coordinated that with General Kelly in the White House. Unfit for office, 25th Amendment. Those are the two epiphanies that the American people have had this week. Now, just to go through, however, the actionable aspects of the Wolf book. I think there are essentially 4. One of them is that Bannon, now this is Steve Bannon, the leader of the gutter snipe faction of the Republican Party, this beyond reactionary, let's say, worse than reactionary, ultra reactionary. We'll have other words for him as time goes on, if he lasts, if he's ever heard from again. But Bannon is telling us through this book, right? These are quotes recorded by Michael Wolff, and he's got the tapes. There are tapes. Lordy, lordy, there are tapes. He's got the tapes. And the tapes say what Don Jr. did in that meeting with Veselnitskaya, Kavaladze, Akhmetshin, Samachornov, organized from afar by Yuri Chaika, the Attorney General of the Russian Federation, with the help of the Agalarov oligarch family. That was treasonous, says Bannon. So inside the Trump camp, it was treasonous. Now, notice, he's not saying Trump is treasonous. He's saying that the son, Don Jr., the son-in-law, Kushner, and Manafort, now fighting an indictment, what they did was treasonous. And then he adds that he is absolutely certain that at some point in this meeting, maybe at the end of it, the Russian delegation was invited upstairs from the 24th floor to the 25th floor to look in on Trump, Don Sr., the candidate, the principal, Ipse, right, the boss. So they went upstairs. Now that is very damaging. Veselnitskaya in Moscow denies it this week, but, we're from Missouri on that one, and we think that it's more than likely. Right? We have Bannon. Bannon is telling us this. So that would essentially be 2 points, right? Treason is 1 point. Secondly, if Trump had actually met with these people, he knew it was not about orphans. He knew it was about collusion. He knew it was about dirt. And he's been lying about that ever since. Now, the third point is in the course of this, we have Bannon warning Trump, and this we've had before, Don, watch out for the money laundering charges. They're going to come after you on money laundering. Now, what is meant here, I assume to be the question of international money laundering through luxury real estate purchase. That is the relevant category. So Bannon is warning him of that, and that would be the Weissman specialty on the Mueller team. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So what are the 4 big points coming out of this book? The actionable stuff, the stuff that might interest Mueller or ought to interest a congressional committee if they weren't such a bunch of poltroons and scoundrels, meaning Republicans. What we have here is, first of all, treason. That meeting was treason, says Bannon. How about that? Powerful medicine. Then, that they all went up to see Don. That means lying, but lying to the public systematically, right? There's apparently, when you lie that much, you're in danger of obstruction of justice, depending on how you do it. Third point, money laundering. Bannon is saying, look, they're going to come after you through money laundering. That's why Robert Mueller has put this guy Weissman on his team. The guy's an expert in money laundering methods, right? He can track it down. I'm sure he has the relevant staff, a few experts of his own, to do that. And then the third part is also highly relevant. That is this guy, Mark Corallo, Corallo, M-A-R-C, first name. And Mark Corallo was the spokesman for the Trump legal team at that point. And as we read, he was told after this Air Force One communique, flying back from the Hamburg summit, from this meeting with Merkel and many others, Putin and so forth, there was this question of a communique to answer what was that June 2016 meeting in Trump Tower with Veselnitskaya, Kavaladze, Akhmetshin, and Samochornov, supposedly the translator, but I'm sure he was more than that. What was going on? Well, of course, it was all about orphans. It was about orphans. It was about adoptions. Not bloody likely, huh? And therefore, they had to come up with a communique. It now seems pretty clear through various sources, various articles, various writers on the subject that the communique was, if not dictated, then largely shaped by Don Sr., Trump, and that this was therefore tissue of lies. And the role of this guy, Corallo, was that he was the spokesman for the legal team, but he was told, shut up, turn off your phone, don't talk to anybody, don't communicate. And he said to himself, according to this the new book, he concluded that this might very well be obstruction of justice, as he told friends at the time. He communicated with people, and therefore he said, I think I'm going to get out of here. And he quit within days. quit within days. Now, some interested parties, the Kushner side of this, put out that he had been fired, but he apparently was not fired. He got out on his own because he could see where this was headed. We should also add that on this question of money laundering, this is apparently the side of things, or the general area, let's say, of international financial relations that would have been of interest to Kushner's father, ex-convict, right, put away by Chris Christie for some years in the federal pen. He was concerned that now that Weissman and Mueller were looking at finances, that the family finances might be hit. So we are told by Michael Wolff that the Kushner, the so-called Jarvanka combination, is haunted by fear. And the overtone that Wolff gives is that they would be eager to throw Don under the bus. That seems to be the attitude of many of these people, that they hold Trump in contempt. Many of them are smarting from his insults and his degradation, and that therefore his ability to command loyalty is negative, and strongly so. So that is, I think, those are some of the fruits of this remarkable exercise. Now, concerning Mueller, naturally, the big task, as we said right at the beginning, is the Mueller investigation has to go on. Without the Mueller investigation, we are in bad shape. This week we've had Nunes of the House Intelligence Committee doing his level best to sabotage any serious investigation of Trump. This guy's a partisan. He's a thug. He's a torpedo. He's trying to shut it down. He's trying to deviate. He wants to bring in who kidnapped Judge Crater and other burning questions of our time. Anything but Russia, Trump, and the obvious money laundering, the obvious obstruction of justice. How about emoluments? I'm sure he doesn't want to talk about those either. So Nunes has been attempting to get his hands on inside dope about the Mueller investigation. He got some papers which are focused on this Fusion GPS story. This is the company that hired Christopher Steele reportedly to assemble the 35-page Compromat dossier, the salacious one, the one that Colbert investigated in that hotel room in Moscow. And so Nunes is sabotaging like mad. We've had these warnings from Adam Schiff that there are attempts afoot to get rid of Mueller. I think the one that I can see is we have these two madmen libertarians, Meadows and Jordan, Congressman Meadows, Congressman Jordan, of the Freedom Caucus. That's the Tea Party, okay? And we told you at the time the Tea Party ends up in what is essentially fascism. And these guys are that. It used to be considered that the libertarians were simply the reserve army of the financiers and the rotten imperialist finance bourgeoisie. Now the libertarians have gotten worse than that. They are now the top attack dogs of Wall Street and the system of financiers, and they're of course their man Trump, right? Their wrecker, the guy who's cutting taxes for them. So the Tea Party has now shown its full monstrous potential. The news last night was that Trump wanted to move heaven and earth, didn't care about any laws of God or man. He wanted to prevent Sessions from recusing himself as the Attorney General in charge of the Russiagate investigation. And he erupted, he went berserk, ballistic, when Sessions did recuse himself. He had been ordered by Trump, don't recuse yourself. And Trump sent McGahn, the White House attorney, over to tell Sessions, don't you dare recuse yourself. Look at this fascinating narrative in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We got the last segment here of the Epiphany program. We're recording on 12th night, and you're hearing it on Epiphany, and we hope you've had multiple epiphanies. In other words, insights, moments of successful concept formation about what's going on and, of course, what you must do. Get active or get radioactive for 2018. We're going to be struggling against war. We want war avoidance. In the middle of that, we want laser-based anti-ballistic missile defense. Get those laser platforms into orbit. They can shoot down scores or hundreds of ICBMs. Reduce Kim to absolute impotence. Secondly, we've got to roll back the genocidal austerity of the Trump White House and the congressional Republicans. We want a 1% Wall Street sales tax. We want to commandeer and requisition the Federal Reserve for $6 to $7 trillion of emergency credit, education, pay off all student loans, retire the debt, in effect, get it down to zero at least, and rebuild the infrastructure, not privatizing anything, not adding tolls, 30 to 40 million new productive jobs, 30 million jobs through Federal Reserve 0% long-term credit, century bonds, and then the 10 million through the Conyers program of WPA, PWA, the Harry Hopkins Memorial Program. And, of course, also stop authoritarian rule. Stop the tendency towards dictatorship. And we've seen that. Again, the attempt to suppress a book is one of the most grotesque and extreme, but also stupid maneuvers of this type. Right? He's shown us what he's made of. You should take that seriously. Libertarians, right? You people out there, you were always telling me, the Constitution. And now a lot of these people are supporting military dictatorship under the auspices of this guy, Don. All right. So Mueller has to stay. Now, as we said at the beginning, the maneuver seems to be Meadows, Jordan. We just saw another guy on TV today. He's Congressman. He's on the House Intelligence Committee, and he's telling us that he thinks it's probably time for Sessions to go. Chris Stewart, Republican of Utah. Sessions probably ought to go. He's a combination of physical weakness and character weakness. Well, of course, that's not the issue. They want to put in somebody in there that would have full power to begin sabotaging Mueller in more effective ways, because as it is, this guy Rosenstein, say what you will, seems to let Mueller get on with it. And this they've now figured out they cannot allow, because again, you've got all of these people in the White House in this snake pit where they all hate each other. The masters of hate have taken over. They're all waiting. They're eager to sell each other out. Right? So this is a wonderful opportunity for a prosecutor. Now then, Sessions, we're told, right before Comey was fired in April to May, Sessions sent federal employees to the Congress to try to search for dirt that could be used to discredit Comey. They've undoubtedly done this on Mueller. You're going to see that they don't find anything about Mueller. He's an authentic American folk hero. That's Mueller. You better fight for Mueller, because if Mueller goes and there's nary a peep, then that will mean you can kiss a lot of your freedom goodbye. This is now the guy that has to be maintained. So Trump sent White House counsel McGahn to stop Sessions from recusing. He recused anyway. He had to. And Trump exploded. Where's my Roy Cohn? Said Trump. Maybe this week on The American System we'll do a retrospective on Roy Cohn, because, there were, this guy went on into the mid-'80s. He was disbarred in 1968. After that, he was of less utility. But we're also told that Trump is so hysterical, really, that they can't tell him the truth. In other words, they have to tell him, look, Trump, you cannot fire Mueller. You can't. And they said this in a way that amounts to a lie, right? They have to manage him with stories. We probably will do a program this week on certain dictators, right? You can think of the classic ones, and how the inability to face facts, right? The inability to hear an account of the real world, your military situation, your economic situation, your political situation, your popularity, right? All of that is unbearable for this weak mind. The guy's weak-minded. He can't take it. So they have to make up these stories, right? They have to make up edifying, self-consoling stories that they tell. So that's other stuff we'll be covering this week on the American system. Now, Bannon, a word or two about Bannon. Bannon, of course, much damage. Remember, though, even though he doesn't have Sheldon Adelson, he doesn't have the Mercer family, he does seem to have a new billionaire, a guy called Kwok. We're checking that. The faction is busted up. Gorka is out. Gorka, of course, was wearing that insignia that seemed to harken back to Admiral Horthy. This was the essentially fascist government of Hungary way back in the 20s and 30s. And, of course, Bannon had this public flirtation with Julius Evola, the self-styled super-fascist and traditionalist, in other words, a raving irrationalist, Julius Evola, who was the inspiration for a great deal of the fascist terrorism in Italy, the so-called bombardieri neri, the black bombers, right? There were red bombers, there were red killers, the red brigades, but then there were the black-shirted ones, right, going back to Mussolini. So that's Bannon's, his interest has gone, at least in one public statement, to that. All right, so we'll have more about Bannon. We'll see what's left of Bannon in the coming weeks. But this, by and large, this Wolf book seems to have been authorized by Trump, wanted by Trump, but encouraged and facilitated and assisted by Bannon. Let's just talk about Brexit now, because this was a big issue at the time, and it may be again. What are the chances of reversing this absolute reckless folly, this lunatic decision, very, very narrow, right? The narrowest of margins, 1 or 2% back in June of 2016. June of 2016 must have been the year when the bacillus of insanity was unleashed from the underworld upon the world, or something like that. Anyway, we've now got two spokespersons, right? Two senior statesmen, I guess, if we can use this, who are telling the British people, don't do it. Now, one of them is Sir Michael Hazeltine. Actually, he's Lord Hazeltine now. Lord Hazeltine was a big deal under Thatcher in the 1980s. He's now characterized as a Tory Conservative Party grandee. And, well, he's saying we've got to pull back from this. This is going to be tremendously destructive. They used to call this guy Tarzan. That was his cartoon persona, Hazeltine, right? And now we've also got Hazeltine and Blair say, we're going to work on Jeremy Corbyn of the Labour Party, and we're going to tell him, look, if you go through with Brexit, whatever you think about Brexit, you're going to be in an austerity climate forever. You're never going to see the end. Brexit is austerity without end. The opposite of what it was sold as. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Once again, this is now the last segment here of our Epiphany program. We're recording on 12th night. You're hearing it on Epiphany. We hope you have some good epiphanies, right? Some learning experiences, in effect. Now, we're talking about Brexit. There is a parallelism, the erosion of the Trump illusion, the Trump con job, the hysteria, the illusion, delusion that this figure actually was the bearer of some kind of political or economic reform, that he really cared about all those poor blue-collar victims of globalization and the international banks in the Midwest? No. His only beefs with the international banks is they refused to lend him money. He's not against their system. He kowtows to their system. He's a devotee of their system. Look, he filled his cabinet with Goldman Sachs. Some of them have left in the meantime. Right? Dina Powell is going to be flying the coop as far as we can see. But Trump has no beef with this system. You were deluded. You were duped. You should wake up. That's one. And then Brexit, right? Remember all of those wonderful promises of singing tomorrows? Take your country back. Oh, it's going to be so great. Remember the demagogue Farage? I don't know where he is now. I wonder if the cops know where Farage is, because this guy, he may end up in the Russiagate net, as far as we know. And there is an entire story about the Russian role in orchestrating the Brexit vote, because, of course, the Russians, and this is really deplorable, this is really foolish, this is absolute folly. The Russians feel that they're called upon and somehow empowered to go in and try to split every multilateral organization. That, of course, they see that as a resistance to their hegemony. Right? This is no good. This is unfriendly. Where the hell do you get off interfering with the European Union or other organizations, but especially this one? It's economic, right? What do you care about this? Is that your big adversary? You got to quit it. It's unfriendly. The price will be much greater than you may think. Okay, so Brexit, a piece of folly. Organized by the London tabloids, all kinds of racist hysteria. The old people voted for it. The young people who will have to live with this decision voted against it. And Ireland, Northern Ireland, didn't want this. They want to keep a seamless border with the Irish Republic in the south. The Scots want to stay in Europe, and it's just this mass of oldies in Britain, right? The English oldies are the ones who want to preserve I don't know what by leaving, take their country back. Remember, one of the favorite promises of Boris Johnson and of Farage was, we have to send 350 million pounds to Brussels every week. And when we get out of the European Union, we're going to plow that back in to the National Health Service. So we'll give you that social safety net that you have a right to. And then as soon as the vote had been taken, it turned out that was a complete lie. It's kind of like Trump's promises, right? I'm a different kind of Republican. Every other Republican will cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but I promise I will not. Try collecting on that one. Right? Try making that into a site draft and see where it gets you. So, again, done by a very narrow margin, showing the insufficiency, the bankruptcy of the British system, is that when you're making a decision of that importance and of that lasting effect, that should be done sort of in the American way of a constitutional amendment, not just some plebiscite on some summer afternoon in 2016. It's crazy. So now we have two voices, right? You want to call these guys discredited? I don't care. Tony Blair is certainly a toxic figure. There's no doubt about that. But here's what we have. Hazeltine, Tarzan, from the Thatcher era, says, you've got to understand that Brexit will be a disaster. It's going to impoverish the country. We don't want it. And he says, I'm a conservative Tory, lifelong, devoted, Thatcherite, all this. But I would regard a Labour Party government under Corbyn as better than Brexit. It would be less damaging, says Hazeltine, the Tory grandee. A Corbyn government would be less dangerous for Britain than Brexit. We have survived Labour Party governments before. Their damage tends to be short-term. We can fix it. Brexit is long-term, not capable of rectification, and there will be those who question whether the short-term pain justifies the avoidance of long-term disaster. So Labour maybe not so good in the short run, but you'd be avoiding the worst. Okay, so he's appealing to Hazeltine. Hazeltine is appealing to Corbyn. Now, Corbyn is from the Bernie Sanders school of namby-pamby. What does he stand for? Does he stand for anything? Is he decisive? Is he a leader? I don't see it. I think he's a bunch of left liberal positions, sure, but a lot of these are foolish. And you can also project whatever you want on there, right? Because he's the big alternative, and of course he benefits from being demonized by the system. So this is one side. Now, more recently, we got Tony Blair. Now, once again, Tony Blair, toxic figure, yeah, Iraq War. But what could be worse than the Iraq War? Well, that might be Brexit. So here's Tony Blair this past week, January 4th, on Radio 4 BBC, today's program. He says, look, when people voted for this on the 3rd of June 2016, they didn't know what they were getting. You had Rupert Murdoch and his rotten tabloids. You had all the other Fleet Street barons spewing out this, racist stuff. And all these promises, right? The pie in the sky for the National Health Service. Now, it's completely exposed as a lie. So here's Tony Blair. My argument is very simple. On June 3rd, 2016, we voted to leave the European Union, again, by a whisker, but we didn't yet know at that point what the terms of the new relationship would be. Once we know those terms of the new relationship, we are surely entitled to think again. It's as simple as that. So have a second vote. When you see the treaty in front of you, when you see what the Brexit is, will it be hard Brexit, soft Brexit? Naturally, the British went into this in their typical way, saying, well, we propose to have all the advantages of EU membership and none of the disadvantages as we see them. No, boys, that will not work. They don't want to reward you. They want to show that your path is the path into the abyss and the path of folly. Now, we're told by Edward Luce of the Financial Times, the correspondent here in the U.S., on one of these NPR morning weekly review on the 1A. He said, look, this proposal by Blair has been met with a significant degree of approval, right? He's not ever going to be liked, no, nor should he be. But this happens to be a perfectly legitimate way to do it, and it's also a good tactic. The idea is you want to have hyper-democracy, you want to have super-democracy, you want to have plebiscites on everything? Well then, the plebiscite of 2016 can't bind us into 2018 or 2019, can it? No. We want to see what the deal is. And Blair's argument, according to this guy Edward Luce, is he's telling Corbyn, look, you have social plans, right? You want to have a social safety net. You want to do things for people. You'll never be able to do any of it. Because with Brexit, this will become a poor country. It'll become a rat's nest. And you better not go for Brexit because you'll then become, if you get into power, you'll be nothing but an austerity administrator. Okay? So this was the week where Trump said Bannon lost his mind and Bannon said Trump has lost it. And our conclusion, they're both right. So make sure Mueller stays on the job and check in a few times a day because you may be called upon to go into the streets and demonstrate to defend your freedom. And we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio and on Monday on the American System.